it be, let it be, let it be. So you're getting version 3 of this sermon. It's amazing how as you live out a text over the course of a week, you allow it to live out you. And so it ended up being a filter through which many conversations occurred over the last week that allowed me to ask the question. And Kelly will notice that the third title is changed. What would love do? And so I'll give you a little bit of a background of where this is placed within the structure. So this scene occurs in 1 Kings right after a young man, Solomon, has become king and he's feeling really antsy about himself. And so he goes, I'm young, can I do it as good as my dad did it? And so he goes and he goes to one of the altars and does something that Yahweh had forbidden, but he still did it anyways. He went to that altar, he lit a bunch of incense, 1,000, one of the parts of the story says, and asks, please, of all the things you might grant me, God, grant me wisdom. That wisdom might abide with me and within me, and that I might execute justice in my life as king. And so part of the context of this is that the king was seen to be ordained by God. And so to go to God and ask for that one quality to ordain me into my world as king, God was pretty impressed. And he said, that's it? That's all you want? Done. And he gave him that, and he goes, because you didn't ask for wealth and riches and long life, I'm going to give you wisdom, that you will have wisdom beyond all rulers in our time, in our place, and for eternity. And I will give you long life and wealth and a kingdom that allows for you to be the presence of justice, of wisdom, of compassion in this world at this time. And so good biblical scholars then have to then add the story that shows the sign of the fulfillment of that. So the very next scene is the scene in the courtroom. And so they come together, and these two women are fighting over, and some of the readings within the Hebrew text, the 1 Kings text, our Old Testament, actually label them as prostitutes. But as you look through the culture of many of the cultures throughout that area, from India and East Asia, they were often represented as a mother and a daughter-in-law. In the Jewish tradition, actually, their midrash of this looks at it being more of a mother and a daughter-in-law who both have had babies. One has died, and in order to fulfill the law, the mother would have to marry the living child, and so we're trying to figure out who gets the inheritance, who gets the money, and all those things that relate to law. So there was more at stake. And oftentimes there's the focus on Solomon and what is his part in this? How is he able to exact wisdom? And was it wisdom or was it trickery? Did he have a sense of deep trust that by enacting this scenario of cutting the woman in half, and in the other stories in India and East Asian, there's sometimes a tug of war, and there's images of it, where they drew a line in the sand and they were tugging the baby back and forth, and finally the real mother lets go. Did he trust that love would prevail? And was that his wisdom? And the women that were in the story, did they trust that love would prevail? And so we get to look at the experience of this and ask ourselves, how are we each of those characters of the story? How are we, when asked to create judgment, able to discern what is that experience that is from deep trust that love will prevail, that we might exact in the justice? How might we open up to what would love do and create the scenarios in our lives that allow for the highest, most, and the greatest, most love to express? How are we as individuals able to open up to love? What would love do? And I love that as this morphed yet again yesterday, the song Let It Be arose for Steve and I as we were trying to see what is the words of wisdom that are being spoken here. Because oftentimes the act of true love that comes from a mother is that of letting go. A parent needs to at some point let go of the child's hand and let that child venture off. There are phrases that say, if you love something, set it free. If it comes back, it was yours. If it doesn't, it was never yours to begin with. Parenting talks about giving roots, but also setting our little ones free. And even eagles sometimes need that push. David McNally's book talks about that mother eagle that eventually needs to push the eagle and let go. Do we have the capacity to truly let go? Do we have the capacity to open up to the ideas that we're birthing in our own lives, but ultimately to simply surrender and trust that love might prevail? And so oftentimes as we look at stories and from a Jungian perspective, we might look at it and say, again, where am I, Solomon? How am I the one mother who says, cut it in half and be done with it. Neither of us get to have the baby. I challenge you to think of those moments for yourself, not for somebody else. Like, we can see how this person or that person might have made that choice, but how might we in our own lives have made those choices in the past? How might we look to the ideas that we were so attached to that if our idea couldn't happen, we didn't want the other idea to happen? And how in our own lives have we chosen love? Have we chosen what true love, which is always in service of life, which is always in service of the gift of wholeness? And how do we open up to the challenge of choosing life in our own individual lives? And so we open up to that perspective. We open up to living out that cultural story. When I was down south, I was watching a show called Once. It's Once Upon a Time, and it's a show of how characters from fairy tales are living out in the 1980s in a particular town in Massachusetts, and they were catapulted there by a curse. And so as I'm watching it each night as I'm kind of trying to stay awake to care for my sister, I realized I had gotten to the last episode. And I was like, what? You know, because it was like living out all those archetypal stories similar to what we're talking about here, letting go and there's, you know, cutting things apart and all that. And so I went on a hunt for a new Netflix show, and I found one called Switched at Birth. Have anybody watched that show? And so it's a story of two moms who gave birth in the same hospital, and in the taking it to the nursery and bringing the baby back, something happened and they were given the other baby. Sounds similar to our story today? So what unfolds is 13 or 14 years of them living in lives that weren't their own. And all of a sudden, in a science project in probably grade 9, they did blood testing and found out that this one particular girl had a particular blood type that didn't match the parents that she was living with. And so The story is, and I'm now about up to episode 23 now, is their lives as they try to reintegrate them. And the choice that the parents and each girl needs to make as they get to know their birth parents, get to know the life that they didn't have, and how do they integrate that into, in all moments of choosing love, and choosing in service of the greater good in what they are, and who they are, and the choices that they make. And they don't always make those choices for love. They sometimes jump to judgment. They sometimes judge to what I missed or what I didn't have. Sometimes go to, should we just cut our losses and swap back? Or take both? All of those scenarios play out in each of these episodes. And I wonder how, again, we look to the archetypes of fairy tales, we look to the archetypes of the stories of our faith, and we ask ourselves, what is the call within community to live out that choice of choosing right relationship with each other, of choosing in service of love? David, one of our centering prayer members, the other day at our centering prayer, we did this reading, and he shared a story. His name is David, and for one of his summer jobs, he was a shepherd. Kind of ironically, David the shepherd, Solomon's father. And so when a group of baby lambs were born by multiple moms at the same time in the breeding season, there was a dog, a Rottweiler, who also gave birth to a litter of puppies. And out of her motherly instinct, the mother of these dogs went and licked a few of the lambs and cleaning them up after birth. And those baby lambs were rejected by their mothers. They had a different scent. They had a different sense about them. And so the shepherds were in a quandary. What do they do? What do they have? These two babies that need nurturing and feeding and caring. And so one of the mother lambs who had lost her baby had not lived, they figured out how to get it to bond with one of these baby lambs. And she eventually took it on as her own and cared for it. And then they cared for the other. Which mother are we? Which mother are we as we come together in this community in this beautiful and amazing time of transition? This time where birthing of new ideas and of ways of being church together are in the forefront of our activities every day, every moment. I'm reminded, as I was looking through my notes about love and Mother's Day, of a couple of quotes. The first is by a man by the name of Ernest Holmes, who is the founder of the church that I was originally ordained in. And he says this: "Only love alone can heal the world and cause people to live together in unity and in peace." And Neil Donald Walsh from Conversations with God says this: "Yea, let all those who have ears to hear listen. For I tell you this, at the critical juncture in all human relationships, there is only one question, and one question alone. What would love do now?" No other question is relevant, no other question is meaningful, no other question has any importance to the soul. And so I challenge us at this beautiful and rich time of transition, of growth, of birthing, of caring, of nurturing, this new thing that we call In Val United, in all of its forms, in all of its portals. What what would love do now? No other question is relevant. No other question is of such importance to the soul of this congregation and the soul of this world. May we choose love. The love that lets go, the love that trusts, the love that surrenders. And may the wisdom of God and the love, true love, prevail. Let us pray. Loving God, in whom is heaven. The words that we spoke at Canadian Memorial as we opened up our prayers to you, a loving God, each week. Loving God, in whom is heaven. Abide in us. We ask that your wisdom abide with us and within us. That the experience of true love be birthed through us in who we are and how we are with and for each other. May we make the choices in deep trust that through love, life, wholeness, goodness, always, always prevails. And may we be its expression here and now, always and in always.